Hi, I visited with my friend Dawn Baird. She's been a friend of mine for a little over 10 years. She is an ordained United Methodist pastor, and she also has a background in nursing and was also one that tested positive for COVID-19 this year. And I wanted to get her perspective on some of the issues that churches are especially having to deal with in relaunching their church services and making sure that the public is safe as we worship together. So hopefully you will enjoy this conversation that Dawn and I had. Dawn, good to see you.
You too.
You have kind of been through it for a long time, but here recently too, and you texted earlier saying that you were kind of dealing with some other turn my phone dinger off.
In fact, I was just like, let me check my. Okay, there we go.
Dealing with other folks that have recently been have tested positive for COVID-19, and you went through the COVID-19 ringer yourself. So.
Yes.
Share with me that kind of take me through that.
Okay. Well, I was officially diagnosed on May 7th. Leading up to that, I had a few symptoms, but nothing, just like a little bit of stomach upset, fatigue. I'm middle-aged, so that all just kind of goes hand in hand. Then my daughter-in-law and my son both had positive IgAs and antibody testing, showing that they had been exposed and that had it, and I had been around them. So that's when I went and got tested because my symptoms had started increasing, started having a little bit of headache and such. Didn't have what the stereotypical symptoms were, which was like the horrible coughing and such that a lot of people report. And lo and behold, I tested positive. And so from there, I was quarantined in a travel trailer in our driveway for 17 days. If I didn't think I was a people person before that, I now know that I truly am.
Well, and so the difficulties of that, because my wife and I were talking about this earlier today. One of the difficulties about this COVID is it hits people differently. We know people that have tested positive and just had very little in the way of symptoms. Some that have shown no symptoms but tested positive, kind of like your son and daughter-in-law you mentioned. And but how did it hit you?
So I agree. It's a beast of a disease because there really is no rhyme or reason to it. I followed all the rules. I stayed home as much as I could. In fact, as I was looking back, I only went into the public, you could say, twice from the middle of March until I was diagnosed at the first part of May. First time was walking around in a store in my inflatable unicorn suit, which was kind of like its own form of a PPE. And then the second time, and I think this is where I was exposed, was I went into a big box store the Sunday after Easter because I just needed to get out of the house. But that's when everybody was still required to wear masks. And everybody where I went was wearing masks. We did have to stand in line because they had occupancy requirements. But I didn't touch anything. I wore a mask. We came straight home, washed hands, hand sanitizer, all of that. That's the only place I can think of where exposure could have happened. And I think that's what makes this so difficult is people can do all the right things and still be affected by it. And like you said, there's so many people who don't have symptoms. I was just talking with a friend today, and his office, so far, 4 people have already come down with it, have just tested positive. So the entire office now is going today to be tested. And for him, he was tested positive yesterday, and a couple of days before that, he had ran 7 miles. So very important that if people think they have any symptom to definitely get checked and tested. And I'm thankful that the cities and offices, doctors' offices and stuff are starting to realize that this is such an atypical novel virus
Mm-hmm.
that we do need to, and thankfully are now having testing opened up to everybody.
Mm-hmm. Well, so with the fact that there's several people out there that are asymptomatic, is it? I mean, the folks that were wearing masks is that kind of has become somewhat of a hot button issue
Oh,
now.
it's become a hot button issue. Yes.
The political aspects of, do you wear a mask? Do you not wear a mask? Of course, businesses are having to deal with whether or not they require people to wear masks when they come in, how they deal with that. Obviously, churches as well.
Yes.
You being a pastor, and also having been exposed to COVID and having to deal with that. I don't think it's an easy thing for any of us, but I'd love your insight as to kind of
it's not an easy thing. And I'll be the first to say I don't like wearing masks.
Well, and you've also got a medical background.
I've got a medical background, wore masks all the time then. And so when I read these stories that are put out on social media, how masks are dangerous because you're breathing in all your own, carbon dioxide and such, I usually private message them and say, think about surgeons and operating staff. That's not the case. And I just don't like wearing them anyway, because they're uncomfortable, especially now that I am still in the recovery stages from the COVID, because as they say, if you count for someone who's been hospitalized or as someone who recovers at home, if you count the number of your worst days, multiply that by 2 weeks for each day, and that's about how long it'll take you to fully recover. And so they're hard to breathe in. They're uncomfortable. But I think as Christians, we're called to care for the vulnerable. And we are called to set examples. And if the least thing I can do to care for somebody else, to make sure that they don't get this disease, is by wearing an uncomfortable mask when I go out, then I do it. Because I think if Christ was to walk into the city of San Antonio right now, Christ would be wearing a mask.
Well, and you mentioned the caring for others, caring for the vulnerable, and that's one of the things that I've seen a lot of is, okay, the masks don't necessarily protect the wearer very much. Correct. But you don't wear the mask for yourself, you wear it to protect those around you.
Protect those around you. So you do get a slight, and the key word there is slight, bit of protection wearing a mask. Of course, you get more protection if you're wearing like the whole N95 PPE setup. If someone was standing in front of you and they coughed and they had COVID and you had a mask, that the mask you were wearing potentially catch some of it. Probably not all of it, but it helps a little bit. But the main reason for wearing the masks is to protect those around us. Because as you said, a lot of people are asymptomatic, or they, for instance, my friend I was talking with today thought his symptoms were allergies. And so we just don't know. And it's, for me, with my medical background, it's becoming very scary because I'm seeing numbers like here in San Antonio where there's only 22% of COVID designated beds left in our city. We're seeing such an increase right now. Then city leaders are having to look at, we can't open up other hospitals that aren't designated, so now we have to open up a hospital in like the AT&T Center or one of the arenas. And that's why you have great medical teams there doing care. It's still subpar care because you're not in a hospital setting. And so I don't, I get people saying I have the freedom not to wear a mask. And yes, I get that. I understand that. My dad was military. I was a military wife. I had sons who were military. I get all of that. But people also have the freedom to breathe and to live a life. And our own Declaration of Independence says that we have the right for pursuit of life, liberty, and happiness. And I can tell you, when you're battling COVID and you've got all the diseases, that is not a life of happiness. I
Right.
have never felt so sick in my life as I did with that.
Well, and you've dealt with a whole lot of sickness in your
Right. Oh, yeah. I've had cancer. I've had a couple of mini strokes. I had open heart surgery when I was 18. My dad calls me Grace. That was his nickname for me, and it wasn't as a beautiful, fun name. It's because I'm as klutzy as they come. So I've had numerous surgeries on, like, knees, shoulders, and so on. And I can honestly say and I've had flu. I've had pneumonia. COVID kicked my backside. I have never been that ill in my life.
Wow.
And
Well,
I wouldn't want anybody else in my church
mhm,
or neighborhood to feel that sick.
mhm. Yeah. Well, and that's it. It's something like, again, my wife and I talk a lot about this stuff. We've got a new grandbaby. We've got
Right.
her dad
Sure.
is in assisted living, and so we try to be pretty diligent on maintaining distance and wearing masks in public for others and all of those sorts of things. But for the for the public that says, well, it's I'll be fine. It's just kind of like catching a cold, or
Oh, yeah.
because I know a lot of people who haven't
Oh,
had
I do too.
much,
Yes.
and then some that it hit them like a ton of bricks, and you just don't know. And for
Yeah.
a while, I think we were thinking, okay, if you're 75 or older, or if you have really bad asthma, or
Hmm.
some of these respiratory issues, then yeah, maybe it'll hit you worse. But it seems like we're seeing that it just isn't real predictable.
It's not. And they're starting to see, like with this second wave that's hitting through Texas, the larger number of those being affected are 20 to 39-year-olds. Now, the deaths are still hitting the elderly. The elderly have the higher death rates, um, but it's hitting the lot younger,
Hmm.
on those 20 to 39-year-olds. And those are the ones that a lot of the studies are showing are having the blood clotting issues and having clots in the leg that lead to amputation,
Hmm.
or that just chews up their lungs. Because what's so strange about this, a friend of ours is a physician, and he's mentioned he's seen somebody walk in and need to be seen, and they're walking and they're talking, and the oxygen rate in their bloodstream, which should be 98 to 100%, is in the 70s.
Hmm.
And they don't even realize that it's that bad. It's just such a strange disease. So it really just kind of chews up the lungs. And now you're seeing young people are having to be put on lung transplant lists.
Hmm.
So to me, this is so new in our medical field, and for providers, and people are going, well, they said this one week and now they're saying this, and I'm saying, right. And they will. It's probably going to change weekly.
Right.
If you look back to measles came out in the 1700s, and it was 212 years later before a vaccine was produced.
Hmm.
Now, hopefully we don't have 212 years on this, but we just don't know enough about it. So my thought is, if we don't know enough about it, take precautions.
Hmm. So, as far as a responsibility, as we're opening churches back up for in-person worship and maintaining social distance, and I've done a lot of my
Oh, yeah.
research and look to other churches, what some other churches are doing, other Methodist churches, other churches in my area, and they have different degrees of precaution. Some have said, hey, we're going to leave it up to you. We advise you to stay 6 feet from people. If you want to wear a mask, wear a mask. If you don't want to wear a mask, that's fine. And they're doing things like not passing the plate and making
Right.
alterations to Holy Communion. But it's kind of if you want to, do it. If you don't want to, that's okay too. Keep your distance. If you see somebody you want to hug and they're okay with the hug, go for it. But and then other churches that are requiring masks, and our church is requiring masks to be worn.
Right.
some of that has gone along the lines of some of the churches that are more optional,
Okay,
have a
right.
much younger group of congregants than our church, and so I don't know exactly what the right answer is. We're tending to err on the side of let's assume we all have it, and or let's assume I have it and nobody else in the room has it.
Right, exactly.
And that's kind of been the way we've approached it. I wouldn't say it's been without a black eye here or two, because it hasn't sit well with everyone in the congregation. I would say 98% have been very supportive in that decision, but there are a few that are having a really tough time with that decision. And I don't know. I know right now you're not having to make that decision, but I know you're talking to a lot of folks that
yes.
are. But what are your?
Oh my
How do we
gosh,
deal with that?
my heart goes out to every one of my clergy brothers and sisters that are in the positions of having to make those decisions. And I think you're right, as in there's no cookie cutter decision to make. There are so many variables. As you said, your congregation tends to be older compared to a church with younger. Is the church an older historic building? So you've got pews that are very close together and you can't move pews.
Right.
And the walls are closed, the ceiling is low, and so on, compared to those who worship in a large gymnasium auditorium with movable chairs. What are the numbers of COVID cases in that city, in the county? What are they doing? Are they dropping? Are they going up? And so on. And then I really feel for the pastors who are kind of being held hostage, financially hostage, by members of their church of, well, I give this much and I think we should open, or I am a descendant of one of the founding families, and so on and so forth. And that just puts an extra layer of stress. And I wish I could talk to every single one of those people throwing out really negative, mean-spirited statements to say, your pastor loves you more than you probably know, and this is one of the most difficult decisions she or he will ever make probably in their career. Give them some slack and show them some grace, because they're not doing this to make your life miserable. When people say, I just want to see everybody again, I remind them the key word there is everybody. And if we want to see everybody, we have to kind of put up with some of these other steps right now.
Right. Well, yeah, I agree, and I appreciate that, and I do know, it's something that, and I guess I put it this way, prior to COVID hitting, I was staying awake more, thinking through other issues in the United Methodist Church.
Yes.
And I guess I'm not nearly as intent on thinking through. We once again kicked a couple of issues down the road.
Sure, we thought a capital campaign would be the worst thing to have to really deal through and walk through, right?
Right, but now we've got COVID, and
I missed that day in seminary. I missed how to pastor a church during a pandemic. I must have been sick on that day because I don't remember that being coming up in seminary classes.
Right. It's tough, and I do know the pastors that I've talked to are really struggling with this issue. A lot of them are not struggling publicly with the issue because they don't want the congregation to go, oh, our pastor is scared to death, or yes, oh, our pastor really, he's made this decision or she's made this decision and gonna, put us all in danger, or, they're pastors are trying to look at this from as wide a perspective, I think, as possible. And, yes, the old saying is you just, there's some things you just cannot please everybody, and then put on top of that a fairly politically divisive issue that may not, and it just becomes difficult.
Yes.
To not just make those decisions, but I guess, not to sound too sappy here, but a little bit of the heartbreak that goes along with you don't care, Pastor. You make this decision, this is going to happen, and you really don't care about these people, and it's. I haven't come across a pastor yet that just said, "Nope, we don't care about those."
I haven't either. The ones and friends and such I've been talking with, a number of them that are losing sleep, or this is, if they're not figuring out how to do the next Sunday with the online, with all that entails, and pastors have been put into the place of now having to become media experts, when again, we didn't have that in seminary also.
Right.
And so they're dealing with the stress of that, and they're dealing with the people saying, we want to open, or even if they're not saying it outright, there's kind of that little passive, oh, well, I miss all the people at church, and you know where it's going. And so as I've talked with different clergy friends and such, as some of the things that I've thought might be advantageous for pastors and churches is appoint a team, and not necessarily your leadership team already in place. Appoint a team who their job is to look at the peer-reviewed data and look at everything, and look at, because there's been some great documents coming out, even from other denominations, showing if you're going to open, here are the things you need to consider. Here are the things you should do. And that way they have ownership in it. Right. And that way they're also seeing, oh my gosh, this is what Pastor so-and-so is now having to deal with. Because ultimately they're called to be the church. Right. And so it shouldn't just be a decision that the pastor makes without having people going, oh, I get it now, or yes, I agree, and I'm going to talk to the other people. And then I've watched some churches that have put together some great pastoral care teams, pastoral partner teams, and they've taken several people who their jobs are to call X number of people in the church weekly, check in on them, and then send a report to the pastor. Takes that off the pastor's shoulder, and they're being the church. And one church I know that's doing that, oh my gosh, it went even better than could be. And because I think a lot of that desire wanting to go back to church is because of a lack of communication and a lack of being able to socialize with each other. And so when churches can put into place those type of other programs, that helps. Having a Zoom meeting, it doesn't necessarily even have to be they have groups that get together and eat lunch out of their house, and they just talk. Right. And they're just able, again, to keep that connection. Right.
Yeah, and that's better than nothing. And there's some of these things I think that are some of the good that's come out of it is we've done that with having folks that are making phone calls. We've got probably 50 people that are making phone calls to other church members, and I thought, duh, why weren't we already doing that?
Yes, exactly. And I have a feeling we're going to see a lot of that continue.
Right.
I've heard of churches that have thought about, well, we need to do some form of live streaming or online worship, and they've just never really gotten around to it. Then all of a sudden they were forced to do it. And they actually saw families and individuals who hadn't been coming to church, say a family with young children or very active teenagers, and Sunday is the only day they don't have anything really truly scheduled. And so the families would tell us, sorry, we should have been at church, but we just kind of enjoyed staying in our pajamas and eating breakfast. But yet they were sitting in their pajamas on the couch as a family, eating their waffles and participating in worship.
Right.
So I think we're seeing how the Holy Spirit is working through this And God is saying, hello, yes, times change, but I don't. Now, how can we bring this into the 21st century to still make disciples of Christ? And
Right.
I think a lot of churches are finding great ways of doing it. And I hope those ways continue after this and
Yeah, I agree. I think there's a lot of good that can come out of this,
yeah.
and so I look forward to that. My heart goes out to all the clergy that are dealing with this issue
Yes.
and will continue to deal with it because it's not like you can get together with your advisory team and go, okay, here's what we're going to do on July 15th. This is what we're going to do. And then on August 1st, this is what because right now things are changing so much day by day, week by week. And that's really, I put together a team like you were talking about fairly recently because after we got through Easter and everything, and it started to look like the numbers were going down. And so we kind of put a plan in place for relaunching. And then the numbers come back up, and I thought, okay, this is not going to slowly be predictable, so that we can be predictable in our response. Right. And so I pulled together some members from our congregation that are in the medical community.
There you go. Yes.
That are serve civically, and also some that are from used to making some pretty high level decisions with organizations that they're already in, so that they've been exposed to knowing what's going on with COVID because of their medical background, or because the cities and counties and so forth and school districts are having to deal with these things. So yes, they have to be well versed and paying attention to things day by day. But I guess that's basically what we've come to see and realize, is that we can't do long range.
Oh, exactly. I think you have to have a plan A, a plan B, and a plan C.
Right.
Because you may have A, you go into B, and then, guess what?
Right.
And it's just a matter of, and that's hard. I mean, you're talking about the church as an institution where we have our lectionary series. That's years A, B, and C, right? Everything is very organized, and we have our liturgies. And now all of this is being tossed upside down. And here we can't be as organized.
Right.
And so I think, gosh, at any time if pastors are leaning on God for wisdom and discernment and peace and guidance, it's now, because we don't know. Like you said, we don't know from day to day what's happening.
Right.
And then you add in the other things of, oh gosh, now I have to do a funeral. I can only have 10 people present. And how do I do that? And one friend who's pastor, his heart is still breaking because he feels like he can't do enough. It's not that he hasn't done enough. He can't do enough.
Right.
His hands are tied.
Right.
It's just, like I said, this is just unbelievable.
Well, and I think that's, I think that's a key too, of feeling like you can't do enough. And so many of us, I think, working from home or sporadically going up to the church, things like that, that there was already kind of a blurred line,
right.
In balancing our time, that is so necessary. And by working, I'm sitting in my dining room right now, right, and I can pick up my computer and show you. I've got yellow pads and books and scripture and all kinds of things out. And I might be sitting here at 8:00 tonight or 10
I was just going to ask you, do you find yourself having to work longer hours or harder because of the situation? Because it is so different and it requires different ways of you working.
Yeah. I think that's it. I think, before I went to the church, went to the office, and kind of had my routine. And and had my going home routine as well, barring, meetings and things in the evenings. But
Right.
those were planned, and the rest of my family, we kind of worked around those things. And now, I'm in all honesty, I used to get up at like 5:30 in the morning and do my stuff, and then go, and
Right.
then probably around Easter, when we started getting used to being at home, and it was comfortable being at home.
Right.
My wake up time slowly moved to about 7,
Right.
and then I thought, okay, I got to start getting so now I'm in that happy place at about 6. But
There you go.
at 6, I'm up, and I start working. I get my cup of coffee and I start working at 6. And then when my wife we have a cup of coffee together, I go right back to it. And then, a lot of times I may not, I may eat a sandwich while I'm working. And then, last night I finally got done around 7:30, 8 o'clock, and said, okay, I'm setting this aside. But I thought I've been doing from 6:30 this morning to 7:30, 8 o'clock tonight with really no breaks, because
Yeah.
I was here doing it for the most part. And I thought, and I still felt like there was the dining room was calling me to come finish up a few things, or
Right.
get this done before the morning. And that's not real healthy.
It's not. And like when we were in RIM, how we had that discussion, I forget who came in and talked to us about being very intentional of separating work from home and
Mm-hmm.
leaving stuff as the door. So as you walk in, you're fully present for your family. Well, that's hard to do when now your home has a makeshift office.
Right.
And you can't, like you said, you can't escape it, because you just kind of like hear it. It's got its own little voice calling to you.
Yeah.
Saying, hello, don't forget about me, type of thing.
Yeah, last night Cindy and the kids were in there. We've got another little like breakfast table area, and it's time to eat, and we've got our college age kids home,
Right.
and so they're like, hey, let's eat, and they're going, and I say, okay, just let me finish this email.
Yes.
and I'll go in there, but I go in there and sit down with them, and they've already asked the blessing, and they start, and so we still got to have good dinner together, but
but you're not able to leave it fully behind.
I wasn't fully present until I sat down, and then we had 15, 20 minutes of eating together, and then I went right back in to go follow up whatever I was working on, and then finally set it aside, and I'm trying to be more intentional. I put aside some stuff on my calendar to go, okay, I'm getting away, trying to work ahead so that I can get away, because that's the other thing, Dawn, you probably know very well, is you can take time off, but if you haven't prepared to take time off, it still takes a long time.
It takes a long time. I have there's 3. Well, they were all in RIM. With Aya and Lisa and Amelia, right? We chat daily, and they're talking about how difficult it is to do a vacation. And and I'm like, hello, I can preach for you, I can do the sermon, and like Lisa's just up the road in Butte. I'm like, I can come in on Saturday to record it as if in your absence. And I think, and I'm hoping and I'm praying that all of clergy out there are saying, I have to do this. I cannot. These times are hard enough, but if I'm not taking care of myself,
right,
I'm not going to be any good to anybody in times when it's even more difficult and takes even more of my energy. And all we have to do is look back to Christ going, hello, I'm going to go take a nap, I'm going out on the boat, whatever the case may be. And we're not honoring our call to God, I think, if we don't take the necessary time off to replenish our own batteries.
Right. Well, I appreciate that. So my dog just decided to.
So, by the way, if you take off time and you need somebody to preach, hello, okay.
Gotcha. I will call him.
Okay.
Well, I appreciate you joining me for this, and I've got another meeting to go to, but I do appreciate this, and I think it will be helpful for
Thank
any
you.
other pastor that gets around to watching it or listening to it. And God bless them. Hopefully they'll take some time off and regroup and regenerate. And I will be hollering at you for
good. Do
for
it.
that.
Yes, definitely.
All right.
Okay. Thanks, Wade,
Don.
for the opportunity. I appreciate it. Have a great day. Okay.
You too.
Blessings.
Bye bye.